And welcome back to the Justin Thurber Show. And joining me again, as always, my co-host Jimmy Davidson. How we doing today, Jim?
Doing good. Thanks for having me.
All right, we have a packed episode today. We're going to discuss how many bills the Mass State House has passed so far. Hopefully, the lower the better. Is Proposition 2.5 override in the works? A choir that was stopped from performing at the nation's capital because people might have been offended because they were singing the Star Spangled Banner. Our country is planning to kill animals in the name of saving the planet, or as I'm calling that segment, culling the herd. And finally, we're going to discuss an article about the rise of quote unquote violent speech and what we have to do as a society to lower the temperature. So let's get into it. Hey, Jim, I know we have some housekeeping things we discussed last week. There was a caucus in Massachusetts for a state committee woman. How did that turn out?
Yeah, so this past Tuesday, this was the final caucus for the Mass GOP State Committee to fill some of the vacant seats. There were two candidates that ran. The winner was Doreen Deschler. Again, like we said, these kind of have been divided between a grassroots candidate and a more establishment candidate in each race. And Doreen Deschler won 65-10. So I think that one kind of sent a statement in that district. So that concludes it. So just as a recap, we had the two in Suffolk County. There was no vote on that one. There was Maria Collins who won, Aaron Packard. One of the districts, there was a undecided winner. And then because there was two people and neither of them had enough votes, or because they have the, what do they call them? The provisional votes
Yes.
that factored into it, that they couldn't declare a winner. And then you had this last one, Doreen Deschler. So in the June 8th state committee meeting that's coming up this week, they will ratify those members of the state committee, and the existing state committee will figure out what to do with that tie and who they're going to declare a winner for that race.
Sure. And for the people listening, and might think that this is not important or doesn't really affect them, I think what we're trying to do here is let you know that there's things going on behind the scenes, in Massachusetts and throughout the country. And I think what happened is we just had an election for the governor, and the Republican candidate lost, and they basically said, well, that's because he wasn't moderate enough. And what's happening is when these state committee people are being voted on, the more conservative is being voted in, not the moderate. So I think what has to happen is we have to sit here and be, hey, listen, maybe people in the state have it wrong. Maybe there's more conservatives out there, and maybe more conservatives who want to see change should get involved. So it's a good sign. We had Aaron Packard on, we had Maria Collins on, and they are very conservative. Like you said, the woman who won 65-10, which is an absolute butt kicking. She's a strong conservative, so hopefully that changes, and hopefully a lot of people in Massachusetts, like I said, around the country, who think that the voices aren't getting heard. I think it's starting. I think a lot of people are getting ticked off and becoming active, and want their ideas to be heard.
Yeah, definitely. And there's definitely been a sense of like an insider outsider game in some of this as well, where we've definitely in the past seen a lot of the insiders win these type of things, where
Yes.
now you get a lot more outsiders coming involved. And I think that's what a lot of people are looking towards too, is just outsiders to kind of shake things up and get involved with things and look at things in a new light.
And the best thing is, too, you and I keep telling people, you can get involved in all different ways. And I always tell people, do something. And one of those things is Republican town committees. If there's one in your town, if there's one in that you can be a part of, what you can do is you can join those. And then if you become a member of a Republican town committee, if and when they have a caucus for these state committee people, you get to vote. So you get a say. You don't really have to do all that much and like be out in public and doing things if you don't want to, but you can play a part just by being a little bit active. So congratulations to her and to everyone that won, and hopefully this is the start.
And then just a couple other housekeeping news. So the OCPF reports that we track. So that an interesting piece of news came out of that. The Baker PAC, the one that's had millions of dollars flow through it, has officially filed for dissolution this past week, which is interesting. So that means that they're no longer going to operate as a political action committee. What's going to happen with that, if it all just falls off or it kind of gets funneled somewhere else, I guess we'll is we'll find out. It's yet to be determined. The OCPF reports for May won't be finalized, I don't think, till Monday. So we'll have a lot to cover in the next show on that.
Yeah. Well, again, like I said, sometimes us being kind of political junkies, even though we're new at this, because I think last year, if you asked me what OCPF was, I'd be like, I have no idea. But I think it's Office of Campaign and Finance, and it tracks if you're a political candidate, all your donations you have to report and all your expenditures you have to report. And actually, if you Google search OCPF in Massachusetts, it takes you to a website and you can type in your representative's name. You can type in if you want to check someone that ran in the past and see how much they raised and what they spent it on. It's actually a really unique tool. It's really good because sometimes you look at some candidates and what they're doing, you're like, does this person even want to win? Because you can spend your money on some what I would consider foolish things. It's just interesting. It doesn't sound interesting, but trust me, if you go on that website and you just started putting people's names in and see where the donations are coming from, it kind of gives you an idea of maybe why our state is going the way it's going. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, it's interesting. You can really poke around, and we talk about this in some of our shows where you can poke around, see what the state party is raising for money. You can poke around to individual campaigns. There's a few that have stuck out. Like one, I think Karen Polito's campaign is spending a lot of money this year, where she hasn't really announced or hasn't really had anything in the docket in terms of running for an election. So, I think when you see activity in something that maybe they're you wouldn't expect it. It might mean that there's more news coming down the road. Maybe she's prepping for a Senate run or something. I don't know. We'll find out. But you can kind of read between the lines sometimes with in the OCPF report. So they're good to check at the end of the month when they get posted and just see what's going on.
All right. Well, that makes a good transition because talking about things that people don't usually look at, another things that people usually don't look at is the bills that the state house passes and the amount that they usually pass a year. And you brought this up to me this week, Jim, and I actually thought it was a good thing to discuss because there have only been 10 bills passed in our Massachusetts state legislature this year. And I put up an article. I'll read a little bit of it and we can discuss. But the highlights from the article say the Massachusetts legislature has passed just 10 bills since early January. According to the Boston Globe, it's the slowest start to a legislative session in at least 40 years. And local lawmakers are hopeful for more progress soon, but believe it's a case of quality over quantity. I don't believe that, right? Um, so what usually happens, about 6,000 bills are proposed or filed every year. Now a lot of those go for committees to be looked at to see, if they want to bring it up to be voted on, and there's a lot of back and forth. Some of these obviously never see the light of day. But for me, the good thing about this is, and usually this happens, like a lot of bills aren't signed because usually states are pretty smart or the people are pretty smart and they want government to be confrontational with itself. They want a lot of Democrats and a lot of Republicans on each side. So bills aren't just passed because a single party holds the majority. They want to have that discussion. They want all voices to be heard. And a lot of times in a state like Massachusetts, where it's largely democratically controlled, basically two or three people, as we said earlier in earlier episodes, two or three people are making all the decisions because they're the top of their party, and their party isn't going to tell them no. And there's none of that friction, there's none of that confrontation. So whatever two or three people want in the state doesn't matter what the people want; it just gets passed. So I'm happy about only 10 bills being passed so far this year. I'm glad. They can be as inefficient and they can look for quality quality all they want if that's what they're going to say. They can look for it for 2 years and not pass another bill for all I care, because a lot of times bills they pass aren't good because there isn't that other party or people up at the state house pushing back and fighting for the people.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like you said, it's most of the state legislature is controlled by one party, and you do have a lot of radical people in the Democrat Party in Massachusetts. And when you look at the bills being proposed, I mean, you'll see some pretty radical bills being proposed of that 6,000 or whatever that they
Yeah,
mentioned. It's like all cars, have to be electric by the end of
35.
2030 or yeah, whatever the bill is. There's a lot of crazy stuff if you look through it. And I think that's a good point, because I think, the leadership at the top, they realize that if we push forward with a lot of these bills, they're going to be very unpopular. So they're kind of throttling at the top, like which bills actually move forward in the state legislature, because they know they don't want to do anything that's like too crazy. Otherwise, it's going to get a lot of pushback in a state that they're already doing pretty well in
Yeah.
legislatively. So they're
Well,
yeah.
yeah, no, well, not to cut you off, but on last week's episode, we discussed some of the bills, and those up for consideration were pretty crazy. You know, sitting here want a $20 minimum wage. They want to hide, well, basically hide their voting records and what bills and what they say, no review period. So there's a lot of silly bills they're still putting up there. But I think what they do is they put it up there, and if people don't know or don't see, and they just pass it, and then listen to people complain later and realize that most people aren't going to vote them out. So they just have license to do what they want.
And like you said, I agree. It's likely a good thing as well, because we've seen some of the bills that they've passed recently, including the millionaires tax that
Yep.
went on the ballot, which actually passed in mass too. But yeah, things like that, where you're just increasing taxes, you're increasing spending, you're giving more people reason to leave the state as opposed to come to the state. So
So,
I think at
oh
this
yeah.
point, the less is better as well.
And it's funny. So I have on the screen right now for people listening, a majority of the bill, I would say 8 or 9 of the bills are basically this person needs more sick time in their sick bank. So they go to their representative and like state employee, I don't have enough sick time. And the representative brings it up. And I think these things almost always get passed. So a couple of those are that. Some are naming police stations and then establishing certain appropriations for other things, but they're nothing really big there. So the only big one was actually the appropriations bill, which was the spending bill, and they did that March 1st. So I like it. If that's all they did, I think we have way too many laws. I think what probably representatives should do is go through all the existing laws and probably take a lot of them or simplify a lot of things and say, hey, listen, we need some laws, but my gosh, we don't need 6,000 laws a year. Imagine if 6,000 law years got passed. I mean, who would know what the heck is going on and what needs to be done? Now, speaking of laws and things that pass, a lot of times what happens is there'll be citizens positions or citizens will want to put things to vote on, as you said, as we said earlier, like the illegal immigrants we were able to vote on if they got driver's licenses. Didn't go the way we wanted it, but the people got to vote on it. The millionaires tax people got to vote on, and another thing that people got to vote on was Proposition 2.5, and I believe it was in 1980 that that was passed, Proposition 2.5, which basically limited how much they could raise your property tax in a single year.
In this, I believe this just happens on the town level, right? Like,
Correct.
there's no Prop 2.5 on the state level. So this would be, in some cases, it can be used both for good and bad purposes, I guess. So for example, in my town, we had a road that was really beat up, and the town was looking to completely repave the road and like redo the road, really extend the road and constructing the road. And obviously that was a big sum of money that the town didn't have in its operating budget. So they put it to Prop 2.5 for the voters to decide, do we want to spend money on doing this road? And if we do that, we have to pass Prop 2.5, which I think essentially just means your taxes. I mean, is there a definition on like when Prop 2.5 takes effect?
Well, Prop 2.5 has been going on since 1980, and what has to happen is if a town requires an increase on their property higher than 2.5%, the town has to vote on it, like an override of 2.5. And I think what happened, it was initially put in place, and I think it's a great idea. And this is just a Boston.com article. And what I think is happening is the state knows that it's not taking as much revenue. We discussed in last week's episode how there's a mass migration out of Massachusetts that keeps happening. We also discussed in that episode that a lot of these people that are leaving aren't poor people, they're people with money and means to leave. So what's happening is we're starting to experience these shortfalls. And then with the pandemic and businesses being able to let people work from home, I think I read an article this week that 20% of real estate that's used for business, for offices or whatever, is going unused in Boston right now. That's unsustainable because what's eventually going to happen, you're going to have these businesses that what they're going to do is they're going to say, hey, we don't need to rent this property. Our people can work from home. So they're going to pull out. When that happens, they have to start lowering rent. These companies have to lower rent to attract businesses. Well, when they lower rent of their properties, that lowers their property value. And then once their property values start going, then the surrounding properties start losing value. So this is part of what the article was saying too, is that you're going to see this domino effect pretty soon, and local governments, towns aren't going to be able to afford things. And that's where I disagree with this article. Is I think what happened is the politicians for far too long think they could keep going to this slush fund of money, and all this money will always be there. And they're doing the things they want to do, like we discussed in another episode about paying $25,000 per immigrant. They're spending money on all these different programs in colleges and schools. We discussed in an episode how Boston wants to give free tuition to any resident, whether you're here legally or not. So there's all these little nice things they want to do and get rid of money. At the same point in time, because of some of their bad decisions, things getting expensive, the workforce changing where people can work with laptops and not have to go into work. What's happening is the dynamics changing, and the only thing that's not changing is the propensity for politicians to keep wanting to spend. And again, like this is just another one of those things. We talked last week about one of those bills that was proposed that they want to allow towns or cities to, when you sell your house or do a property transfer, that they'll be able to charge you a 0.5% up to 2% in a fee. Well, it's not a fee, it's a tax. So what's happening is they just keep looking for these new revenue streams instead of actually doing what they're supposed to do and say, hey, listen, we can't keep spending because all that's going to do is speed up the process of people leaving. So what we have to do is actually be a good fiduciary of other people's money, like not spend like a drunken sailor. Like we got to spend and like you and I have to, right? When we have a house, we have a budget, we have to spend within our means. And I hope this forces them, or if it doesn't force politicians to do it, hopefully it ticks off enough people that they say enough, and there's good people that run that are sick of it, and we can actually change the dynamic of how the state house is running right now.
Yeah, and as we know, it's like the economy works in cycles too, and I think it makes sense when everything is going kind of in a trajectory upward cycle where it's like each year asset values, property values increase a little bit, so the tax revenues increase a little bit, the spending increase a little bit, everything kind of moves in line. But then what happens is as your property taxes, as your property values go up, your taxes, as a percentage should kind of come down to reflect the total. But a lot of these towns, they don't do that. They
No.
charge you 10% or whatever on your property. It doesn't matter if it goes up from, let's say 200,000 to 400,000. The percentage should come down in that situation for them to tax the same amount. But instead, what happens is the overall tax revenues come up, and the
Yes.
towns get used to spending that level of money. And then what happens is that's great in an upward cycle. But once you start to reach these bubbles like we did in 2008, and if there's a recession, we could be in one right now,
Yep.
all of a sudden you start to see the asset and property values start to come down. And then the towns are already used to spending this level. They're already used to this higher level of spending. And I think that's why we saw the state reach a deficit in April, because as stock gains, capital gains are not as high as they were last year. As property values start to come down, a lot less revenue starts coming into the state, and then all of a sudden, these because they're used to budgeting at these high rates, now all of a sudden there's a huge gap in the budget that they were not expecting.
Yeah, so let me read some. I'm going to jump around this article because this article seems way out of order for how I would have wrote it. But I'm going to jump around a little bit, and then we can discuss just a little bit longer. So Proposition 2.5 is the product of a 1980 statewide ballot initiative after years of hefty inflation in the 1970s. The measure limits how much property tax revenue a community can raise via property taxes. The measure states property tax revenues can't increase more than 2.5% annually, without an override majority vote. So, like I said, the town has to come together. There has to be a vote. What they do is they put the kids out there that are gonna not have band, not have sports. They use these kids as political tools all the time, and oh, this you're not going to have a football team and they're not going to have music unless you do this. So pisses people off, and then they have to vote against their thing, and no one ever puts out the politicians that made these bad policies and be like, hey, why don't we just hold these people to account, right? So another thing in this article says plugging the gap means looking for new income streams and perhaps revisiting a more than 40-year-old statute that limits how much property tax and local governments can collect. And then there's this guy, a real estate attorney and former Boston City Council president, who says there will be lots of 2.5 overrides in the suburbs. They know because their prescription for their mismanagement isn't to stop mismanaging, it's to just keep raising money. Right? Spend, baby, spend, I guess.
Well, yeah, and it's like, I mean, this isn't rocket science, right? So it's putting together a budget. Anyone has to do this, whether you're in a household or you're in a company, and it's like in good times, that's when you want to be putting money away. So that's when you want to be putting money into like a slush fund or something, so you have it for the future. Like, if you have projects, you kind of structure your money responsibly, so you have like money to spend on it. Where
Jimmy, what's putting money away for the government? Are you kidding me?
I know. It's like, yeah, I love it when someone I was talking to was talking about this too, where the town wanted to do Prop 2.5 for something. It was for like, I don't know, salary increases or something, and the town ended up shutting it down. And they said, no, we don't want to increase people's taxes to fund this. And then all of a sudden, the town was like, oh, well, we found this money in our rainy day fund, so we'll actually fund it with this other money instead. And he's like, well, wait a second, if you had this other money sitting on the side, why were you asking people for higher taxes in the first place? And that's, I think, the kind of games that happen with this stuff, unfortunately.
In this article, it talks about the town of Newton, and the voters actually voted this year and declined a Proposition 2.5 override, because there was a school funding gap. But it goes on to tell you in 2002 and in 2013, they had passed Proposition 2.5 overrides. So I'm glad the town did it. I'm glad the town didn't fall into this, oh, we're going to lose all this other stuff. But I'm sure there was people pissed at other people on both sides and were ticked at the wrong people. You have a lot of people retired, fixed income, elderly, don't make a lot of money, and they're just trying to scrape by. And again, because of school, like a school should know, hey, if we're only gonna get 2.5% a year, this is how we manage it. But it seems like every 4, 6, 8 years, all of a sudden, like, well, we're coming up short. And we discussed this, I think, on last week's episode too. We discussed how in the 1950s, schools had more activities for kids to do. Like I said, I used to look back at my mother's yearbook and like, look at all these silly activities. Now there's less and less activities, and we've paid more and more for things. So we're basically getting less for our dollar. So I think what has to happen is that this article to me is just to get people in the mindset that it's coming, and they're gonna blame everything except what needs to be blamed. They're gonna blame the recession. They're gonna blame the laptop class. They're gonna blame greedy business owners. They're gonna blame everything except the tax and spend politicians who are spending 25,000 per immigrant here, and or they're spending, like I said, all this foolish money on all these social justice programs that they wanna do. And I don't even care, like, even if it's not a social justice thing, like, just money that could go to something better, right? Like, I don't care if there's something that I want and the government does, and they say we're going to take money. Good, take the money, use it properly, fund what needs to be funded. Like, there should just be a base, right? Like, you should at least be able to take care of these things. But we can't even take care of the homeless now. We can't take care of veterans. We can't take care of the elderly. But man, we can sure take care of a lot of other things that doesn't make a difference. So
And 9 times out of 10, this spending is really just kicking the can down the road, because it's just a way for them to fund a project that, like, they don't really have a real solution towards in terms of balancing the budget. So a lot of times it's just really making the decision that they're going to have to make later down the road even worse. And like we know with all this stuff, it's great when you can keep increasing taxes, but eventually at some point, the music stops, and
Yes.
that's when you have to kind of, I guess, stop and face the music.
Yeah. I think a lot of the politicians at that point just like, well, they won't run and they don't have to take the heat. And maybe that's something, maybe, talking about those bills in the last part of this last segment is maybe what some bills should be is like put politicians on the hook for their bad decisions. That would be nice, wouldn't it? Like, I'm on the hook if I make bad decisions. Maybe they should be on the hook because one of their duties is to be fiscally responsible, and they're anything but. So maybe there should be some laws that, hey, if you're not fiscally responsible, you're gonna have to pay too. I think that would cover some things. But again, we're not big into bills, and that leads to the next segment where we had a Rushing Brook choir that was slated to sing at the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. And there was some miscommunication, whatever. I'm going to play a little bit of the clip. I'm going to go through a little bit of the article, and then we can discuss this because I have some issues at how this all went down. Okay, so for the people that are listening, what happened was this school was allowed. I guess Kevin McCarthy and some other people invited them to speak in like a rotunda area of the Capitol, and they were singing. And what you saw in the background of the video is these police officers, and there was a female police officer talking to some people, and then all of a sudden a guy walks over and cuts them short, and like you're done. Now, initially when this came out, it was said that there were people that were offended, and that's kind of what ticked me off when they said there was people that were offended by these people singing. I think it was a Star Spangled Banner, and then obviously it was a he said she said. Well, they didn't have the rights to do it. Like they didn't get authorization, and then they did have authorization. So let me read. I have an article up from the Daily Signal. I have some different issues. I don't care about the he said she said. I don't care if they had permission or not. And I know a lot of people can be like, "Whoa, what are you talking about?" Maybe I'll say what I think first. I think we've gone way too far when we have to give people special permission, especially on public tax funded property, to be able to do things. Like colleges have free speech zones. Well, they still do, even though they're not supposed to. So you go to a college, tax money's paid to a lot of these colleges, people pay to go there, and then they're like, hey, listen, this country's built on free speech. It's in the First Amendment, but you can only do that here. Hey, this is the capital that you guys paid for. But if you want to do anything here, like if you want to sing the Star Spangled Banner, you can't do it without special permission. I'm like, what kind of country are we turning into? So I'll read a little bit. We can discuss a little more, Jim. So this is from the Daily Signal. I was shocked. I was dismayed. I was stunned. David Roshbach, the founder and director of the Rushing Brook Children's Choir, told the Daily Signal of the incident, which took place on Friday, May 26th. I couldn't believe that was happening, that they would stop the national anthem of all songs. So what happened is he said he had secured permission from 3 congressional officers for the choir to sing in the Capitol. He said South Carolina Republican Rep. Tim Williams Timmons, Joe Wilson, and provided documents giving permission. So he had documents. And the House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, also supposedly gave them permission. So here's what I think went down. And again, this is all speculation, is there are some sort of policies about singing there. And the Capitol Police told them, well, we don't allow anyone to sing, or we don't want anyone to do anything in there. But what happened is March 29th of this year in the Capitol Rotunda, a group of 80 pastors was allowed to sing there. So which one is it? I mean, who's lying? This is the thing. You sit here and you just, what's going on? So that's why I kind of believe initially it was probably someone got offended, or someone didn't like what was going on, and they want to pull a power trip. And because we have these silly policies, these silly rules in place, they get away with limiting people's rights. And I think that's what aggravates me about this, because what, what was it? There was a couple years ago they shut down all parks in Washington D.C. And I'm sitting there like, you're shutting down parks. And then what happened is, I guess the park police were like, I guess it was a funding. That's what it was. There was a funding issue, and they were going to shut down the government, right? Remember, and they're always like, oh, people aren't going to get Social Security, but they always fund Social Security, so that's a lie. So what they did is they shut down the national parks, and you had all these people going there, and they were moving the gates that were put up and going in, and there was people for the national park saying, hey, we'll go, you don't have to pay me, even though everyone knew, because they were a federal employee, once the finances was resolved and the Congress and Senate passed the bill, they were going to get back pay. What they did is they said, we'll go in and we'll let people go in, and they're like, no, you can't, because what they want to do is the government wants to punish its people for the inability to do their job. You sit there, you're like, that national park is mine. That capital is mine. And I think people should really understand that and believe that. This, I'm not being hyperbolic here. It's ours. And we have to understand that. And I think politicians have to realize that. Because I think when I say people, we flipped the script, right? Politics has done a 180. They're like, we're in charge. You listen to us. And that's not how it's supposed to be. We're in charge. The people says, we the people. We're in charge. And I think what happens is, by following all these little rules and laws and permitting things, and you can only do this here, and you're only limited to speak here, or have this thing there, what we're doing is we're accepting their terms. And we have to push back on that.
Justin, you must have missed Joe Biden's speech last year when he said "we" actually means "we, the government."
Oh, really?
He actually said that in one of his speeches.
I definitely missed that then.
But yeah, no, this is a situation where a little bit of common sense goes a long way, because I can't imagine, given how long the Capitol building has existed, I can't imagine this is the first time that anyone's wanted to sing in the Capitol building, whether it's for a Christmas carol or you name it. So I can't imagine this is the first time it's ever happened. But again, too, it's like they're singing the national anthem. So again, it's not like they're in there all day singing and you're like, you don't know what to do. It's like, okay, they're singing one song. You can wait till they're done. They're not causing any crazy harm or anything like that, and trying to figure out what the situation is there. And I mean, even if, there was a communication gap where they got approval, but it wasn't communicated to the right people, I mean, that's something you can quickly resolve. So
well, you said it right. Like, I think we can all be reasonable people. And again, what's happening is we're getting rid of reason for laws or policy or precedent. We're absolving us of critical thought because there's these policies or this way we've always done it or whatever. And again, like I'm reading right now, I have Kevin McCarthy's tweet up that he did. He's like, just learned kids were interrupted while singing our national anthem at the Capitol. Unacceptable. These children are welcomed by my office because your Capitol is back open. And that's what I'm glad he said, that your Capitol is back open. And those two other those congressional people who invited them to sing in the article said, these children were welcomed by the Speaker's office to joyfully express their love of this nation while visiting the Capitol. And we are all very disappointed to learn their celebration was cut short. We are delighted that the People's House has been reopened, particularly for our children. And this is the thing, is they're children here. We can be reasonable. If these kids were tearing down statues, spray painting things, holding a riot, okay, like, hey, listen.
Then they might have been invited in.
What?
The way the government's been acting lately, they might have been invited. We need space for them to burn things down.
They would have, hey, break out the marshmallows, right? Yeah. They were breaking out marshmallows. But this is another long-standing issue I've had lately with what goes on in our society. we have a lot of people that are just willing to outsource their thinking to laws or precedent or something and not actually sit there and challenge it. If I was one of those police officers there and there was kids singing and no one was complaining, and I didn't care if people complain anyways, they're singing the national anthem, I'd be like, well, you're complaining to the wrong person, let them sing. But to sit there and think that you're on your high horse and you're going to cut these kids off and all this other stuff, it just goes to how society has stopped being able to critically think, to reason. And I hope stories like this get out in the open more. I hope to see them go away, to tell you the truth. But if they go out there, I hope what it does is there's that backlash and people are starting to say, enough, enough. We need to be done with this.
And it seems like a small scale, like, oh, it's just the government, and it's just like a Capitol police officer just shutting down a choir. Seems like, it's in his jurisdiction to do so. Not a big deal. Don't worry about it. But that's the theme that we've been seeing, and it's happening at a bigger and bigger scale, where the government is saying, hey, you can't do this. Like, we're pretty much using our authority to prevent you from doing that, and we're
In the
seeing it
people's
happen.
house.
Yeah, we're seeing it happen all across. We're seeing it happen to like farmers, like we talked about.
Yeah.
So the government stepping in saying, oh, you can't farm here, or you can't you can't do these things because we're shutting you down.
Yeah. Well, that leads us into a good transition. When doing some research for the show this week, I think a lot of people, I don't know if they've been paying attention to what's going on in the world, but because of climate change and climate alarmism with a lot of countries, a couple months ago, Dutch farmers were told to basically sell their farms or get rid of their farms, and they protested. They had huge protests that didn't make the news. And then I saw this article that Ireland is considering now. Obviously, when this information gets out, they change what it. Oh, we didn't really mean that, but they're considering killing over 200,000 dairy cows to meet its climate change targets by 2030. So, so you sit here and you're like, we're gonna kill living things. Now, granted, some people eat hamburgers. I like steaks and hamburgers or whatever, and we understand that happens. But doing it just to meet a CO2 number, some random number that some unelected bureaucracy came up with, this doesn't make sense to me.
No, and I mean, I was thinking about, like, I mean, didn't Ireland already go through something like this? I don't have the full background, but, like, I mean, the first thing that pops into my head when we talk about farmers in Ireland having to shut down their production is the potato famine in
Yep.
Ireland, and I'm pretty sure that had to do with at the time Ireland and Great Britain were going back and forth at war with each other, and this is what happens when countries go to war with each other. One of the first things that they attack is the food supply. And here in this situation, we have it where, I mean, it's a common theme that we've seen where it's like, we see less like country to country conflict going on across the world, but it's almost like now it's almost our own governments are the ones that are the antagonists here, and the ones that are doing this stuff to their own people.
Yeah, let me read some of this article because I think a lot of people haven't seen this is going on. A lot of people don't know this is going on. I was talking to you earlier that the UN a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago, had a thing about how farming contributes to like 25 or 30% of all CO2, and they want to make that zero. And I have no idea how you make that zero in the future. I really don't, especially trying to feed all the people of the world. So if you're trying to reduce carbon and humans are carbon based and you want to get carbon down, you can draw your conclusions, especially if you start off, now killing 200,000 cows. What else can you do? So here's some of the article. British beef and dairy farmers are now very jittery. It seems increasingly clear that there is an eco-modernist agenda to do away with conventional meat altogether. It's not just the Extinction Rebellion mob either, or many of the world's politicians are on board. So, they are those fringe groups like Don't Eat Meat or PETA or whatever, usually tell you not to do it. Now, what happens is you have world's politicians, well, in unelected non governmental agencies or organizations that are sitting here saying, hey, listen, we need to get rid of meat and dairy. Well, what are we going to eat? Bugs. That's what,
Yeah,
that's what
I
they're
was
going
gonna
to
say
tell you.
mealworms.
Yeah, mealworms. Dutch and Irish politicians have failed to recognize that regenerative farming techniques allow livestock farmers to help mitigate climate change by sequestering carbon in the soil. The technology needed to measure soil carbon accurately has recently been developed. So what's happening is you gotta love farmers because for years politicians, people, corporations have been after them, and they have to constantly adjust what they're doing and how they're doing it. So now the farmers are like, hey, listen, you're talking about these climate goals. First off, people need to eat. People want their cheese, people want their burgers, people want their vegetables. Like they need to eat. And we're trying to do sustainable things. And you're saying that's not acceptable. But if we don't produce food, people don't eat, and people need to eat. So we've said this, in, like I said, multiple episodes. For the people that listen, I think what happens is politicians want the picture and the law to say they do something, and they don't care about the effects. They don't care about the long-term implications. They can like, oh, I did something, and I have a picture to prove it, and I passed this law. But then when the law goes to crap, they're not sitting there like, oh, that was my law. They're sitting there and like, well, someone had to do something.
What's ironic about this too is the UN is behind this, and there was, for those who don't know, I think it was about a year ago, the UN had actually published an article explaining all the benefits of world hunger.
Yep.
And you know, it's something that you almost think is made up. It's like, oh no, the UN is there for good reasons. But in this article, they were talking about how hunger motivates people to do labor, and you need to find a way for people to do like low skilled labor. And
Yes.
hunger was such a great benefit, because if you keep people hungry, it gives them motivation, it gives them an incentive to do manual labor. And it was just the most like backwards article that you could think about. And it got, obviously it started getting shared on social media, and it got such big backlash that like within 24 hours they had to take it down. But it's just like from time to time you see these organizations say the quiet part out loud in
Yep.
terms of like what their policies are trying to do. And it just, I mean, you look at the like we talked about, like the IMF will put these out, the UN will put them out. They'll just talk about how they're coming out with all these policies to crack down on farming and everything else, but they're not they're not for good
No.
reasons. They're not to help society. They're
Well,
going to damage society.
I think here's buried in this article. There's a what page we on? Here we go. There's this line: wreaking havoc on livestock farming families in the name of climate science is also very short-sighted. By the time, if ever, lab food technology, which uses huge amounts of energy currently, is efficient enough to replace the edible fats and proteins from animals. I think what's happening too is you have this techno, political, corporate thing saying, "Hey, listen, we could produce meat in a lab and sell it to people." And it's funny. There was that meme that goes around that talks about like this that whatever that hamburger is, that Impossible Burger, and it says like all the ingredients to make it, and then it has what a hamburger is, and it's like beef. And I think what happens is in these people mind, if they just sell you beef, all they can sell you is beef. But if they sell you this fake beef burger, there's 20, 25 ingredients in there, and all these companies get a piece of the pie. All these companies get to make extra money because now they're selling you this fake beef that all you have to do is raise a cow. And again, what they'll never do, what politicians will never do, is they'll never sit there and say, hey, this Impossible Burger compared to that other burger that was a cow that burped or farted that created CO2 that we're trying to neutralize. There is actually 20 plants around the country using all this electricity, driving all these vehicles to and from. They won't count that carbon. They won't count how much that takes. They'll just tell you it's good for you and it's green because they're getting paid to tell you it's good for you and it's green. So one of the other things about it too, let's get to the next part. So now that that got out, the Department of Agriculture in Ireland responds saying that it's not final policy. It was just modeling. We were just modeling what would happen if we kill 200,000 cows. And again, remember we talked about earlier in the episode about the bills and there only being 10 bills, and sometimes they'll They pass a lot of laws and they put things out there to see if people care, then they don't. I think what one of these things was to gauge the temperature of the population. Let this slip, we're going to kill cows, and if most people didn't catch on or didn't care and they could do it, they would have done it. But now that people are like, what the hell are you thinking? They're like, oh, it was just modeling. We really weren't going to do that.
And it's not like this is something that hasn't happened before. I mean, look at what happened during COVID and like the lockdowns. I mean,
Yes.
China had killed like millions of animals, like whether it was chickens or cows or pigs. Like if you look up the amount of animals that were slaughtered during COVID because of, they were afraid they had the virus and they were going to spread it and whatnot, like
Yep.
it is just absolutely alarming. And it's like they're using the same sort of mindset, and now they're just applying it to, now all of a sudden we have to do it for climate change. So it's the same outcome but a different explanation.
So here's another part of this that, again, when we say they're short-sighted, I'm going to read this little section to you, and it just shows how short-sighted they really are. Ireland's agriculture sector was directly responsible for 38% of national greenhouse gas emissions in 2021. So the EPA comes out, oh, that's almost 40% of our greenhouse gases. The state has around 2.5 million dairy and beef cows, according to the Provisional Irish June Livestock Survey. Together, beef and dairy account for around two-thirds of the country's agricultural output, with around 90% of the produce exported. So I think most people would read this and be like, okay, there's some greenhouse gases, but 90% of what they're producing is exported. So you take some of that capacity away from them. Now the people that rely on those exports, what do they have? Nothing. The farms that used to have these animals there, now they're getting less revenue than they used to get. So either costs go up or they go out of business.
Well, and it's funny too, and this will be my last point on this too. Is
Yes.
just, I mean, it's the same thing with the oil and energy markets, where it's in the U.S. We're cracking down on energy and like bringing in new natural gas plants and oil plants and all this stuff. But look at what's going on in other parts of the world. I mean, Saudi Arabia and Russia. I mean, they're living like kings by bringing these plants online. So it might not be happening in your home country, but it's happening in another part of the
Yes.
world where the standards are much less, and these other countries and these other places are making profits, and they're the ones that are reaping all the benefit. Well, it's pretty it's pretty dumb, to be honest. It's like we're cracking down on like doing it the right way at home, and then meanwhile it's like the world ends where our border ends, because it's like all this stuff is being outsourced to other countries, and they're doing it in a much less sustainable way than if it were to be done here at
Yeah.
home. And that's the same thing that's going on with the farming.
And one last thing too. So the agricultural minister over there, some Charlie McGonigal or whatever his name is, subsequently announced proposals for a voluntary dairy reduction scheme hoped to start next year. So a lot of times these two things happen. A lot of times they start voluntarily, then you're voluntold. And then the second thing that's happening is the state over there is going to pay for every cow they kill. So who is going to pay for every cow they kill? The people. So again, this goes back to the stupidity of how this stuff works. The people pay the taxes. The taxes are going to go to this guy who has an ideological vision of the future that maybe a lot of people don't want, or at least have a discussion about. And then what's going to happen is they're going to kill all these cows, and it's going to make less food. It's going to make people starve, and it's going to make things more expensive. It's going to put farms out of business. And the only people that are going to be happy about it are the people that never have to pay the price, which obviously is the elected politicians. So, yeah, that's all I got. It's something to look at. It's something to pay attention to, because if you look, it's happening around the world. Like I said, in Dutch, they had the farmers who revolted because they wanted to take their land away, and I think that's still ongoing. In America, we've had a lot of farms catch fire mysteriously. There was one in Connecticut a couple months ago. I think it was a big chicken farm and caught on fire somehow. I never heard of all these fires in the last year of all these agricultural facilities around America. But things are happening, and our food supply should be protected. And I think when you have something that people rely on to live, there should be more voices, and everyone should be involved, and everyone should be paying attention. So that's what I have on that. So I found this article on the Hill, and I thought it was very well written, and it speaks to something that I think a lot of people, if you've had discussions lately with a lot of people that aren't politically aligned with you, are starting to realize, and that is, as the article headline states, your speech is violence. The left's new mantra to justify campus violence. Now, this to me, I don't want to say it's scary, but it's something that if we don't lower the temperature, if we don't point this out, if we don't start holding people to account and saying that makes no sense, it's not going to get good in America. So let me read this article and we can discuss some things. And I have a video to show. So the article goes, "Silence is violence. When those words became a popular mantra years ago on college campuses, I wrote that the anti-free speech movement was moving towards compelled speech while declaring dissenting views to be harmful. Today, it isn't just silence that is considered violence on the college campus. It's also speech, as both faculty and students are actively shutting down opposing views on subjects ranging from abortion to climate change to transgender issues." So, right off the bat, what he's saying is, hey, there are people out there that don't want to hear a differing view. If you have a differing view on climate change, like I'm sure that last segment we did, people are going to be like, Justin, you don't understand. It's an existential threat, like whatever. Abortion, whatever the issues are, there are people it's so ingrained in their head that if there's anything outside of their worldview, it's literal violence, which is absurd. But that's where they're going with this.
Yeah, and it's like you have two sides, and I mean, to be honest, if someone has a different viewpoint than me, and like we have them speak at a school or something like that, or like a local community, I'm like, I mean, my town, they had there was like a drag queen night or something like that, which, like, I'm not against, I mean, I'm not like, it's not something it's necessarily I'd want to have in my backyard, but it's like not something that I'm like, hey, if they're not harming anyone, like they're not trying to indoctrinate kids in it, like, I have no issue with them, like,
Yeah.
do what you want in private, but like, you don't see me with my pitchfork coming there like, hey, shut it down, like burn this place to the ground. And because that's not how free speech works in America. But what you're not seeing that reciprocity on the other side, where,
Yeah.
hey, I'm not doing that to ideologies that I don't agree with. So I wouldn't expect that to happen, when there is something I agree with, or, maybe it's not even something I agree with at all, but that's
Yeah.
the purpose of free speech, is it applies to everyone.
What,
And
I- what I, yeah. What I
everyone
think
should have the ability to talk.
yeah, I agree with you. I think what happens is we expect the same courtesy that we give them to be given to us, which isn't happening. And again, what happens a lot of times in politics, I think how things get so much worse, they'll come out with something that we don't agree with, and then we think and like, well, that doesn't make sense, and then we try figuring out why it doesn't make sense, and then what we'll do is we'll present our facts to say, hey, listen, we get what you're saying, but we think you're wrong because this and this. And what happens is most reasonable people that can reason are in a rational, they'll sit there and they'll be like, "Oh, you know what? That makes sense. I never thought of that before." And like we said in other episodes, like in that battlefield of ideas, we want those ideas to be out there. We want them to be fought. We want them to be discussed. And then whatever the best that came out of that, discussion is how we go forward as a society. Well, I think what happens is politicians, especially on some sides that know they're on losing issues, they've ratcheted it up to a point where they've attached emotions to issues. And then now, instead of just saying, hey, listen, if someone can prove you wrong, then you're wrong and you have to change your ideas and you have to grow. I mean, that's part of being a human. What they've actually done is they've allowed you to say your speech is violence. I don't have to listen to it, and I'm going to be violent towards you to shut you up That is absurd. So let me read some of this article. I have a video that goes right with this because I couldn't believe it and I found the video. So recently, many people were shocked by a videotape of Hunter College professor Shalian Rodriguez trashing a pro-life student display in New York. Most were focused on her profanity and vandalism, but there were familiar phrases that appeared in her diatribe to the clearly shocked students. Before trashing the table, she told students, "You're not educating crap. This is effing propaganda. What are you going to do? Like anti-trans next? This is BS. This is violent. You're triggering my students." The videotape revealed one other thing. At Hunter College and other colleges, it seems that trashing a pro life student display and abusing pro life students is not considered a firing offense. Hunter College refused to fire Rodriguez. The PSC Graduate Center, the labor organization of graduate and professional schools at the City University of New York, supported that decision and said Rodriguez was justified in trashing the display, which the organization described as dangerously false propaganda and disinformation. So we already know this lady is willing to destroy people's property, swear as a professor, not engage in like logical discussion or honest and open discussion. So it gets even better with this professor. Rodriguez later put a machete to the neck of a reporter, threatened to chop him up, and then chased a news crew down the street with a machete in hand. Somewhere between the machete to the neck and chasing the reporters down the street, Hunter College finally decided that Rodriguez had to go. Here's the other problem too. I think a lot of people don't think their actions should have consequences because a person that was emboldened, and again, she was emboldened by the college. I told kids off. I destroyed their table. And the college supported me, so I'm emboldened to do this stuff because I'm not a fascist or whatever in their mind they think. So now when you're held accountable for putting a machete to someone's neck and then chasing them with a machete, she denounced the school for having capitulated to racists, white nationalists, and misogynists. She explained that her firing was just a continuation of attacks on women, trans people, black people, Latin people, migrants, and beyond. It's so you got this word salad of non-thinking. I'm gonna take everything, lump it together, and anytime I'm wrong or do something wrong, it's never my fault. It's their fault, and I get to be violent towards them. We can't live in a society. So let me just get to this video really quick because I have all the videos. I have the video, and if you're gonna listen on Spotify or the podcast, go to the Justin Thurber YouTube page to watch this video because it's crazy. So there's three parts of it. There's the part of her flipping the table. There's the part of her putting the machete to the neck of the New York Post guy that went to talk to her about this. And then I guess that wasn't enough, so she chased him outside and ran after him with a machete. So I'm gonna play that video right now because, and again, I shouldn't have been fired. She's right. She shouldn't have been fired. She should have been thrown in prison.
Jail. Yeah.
You're not educating. This is propaganda. What are you gonna do? Like anti-trans next? Is that what you're gonna do next?
I mean, no, we're talking about abortion.
This is this is violent. You're triggering my students.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
No, you're not, because
I'm
you can't
sorry,
even have a baby. So you don't
true.
even know
That
what
is
that
true.
is.
That
You
is
don't even
true.
know what this is. Get this out of here, yo. This shit.
So right now, she has the machete to the guy's neck, and I paused the screen so you can see the machete. She put it right up to his neck. Crazy.
Let's get out of here. You can't do that.
So they leave. They probably wanted to talk to her. I didn't see the whole thing. Maybe they were bugging her. You don't have to come to the door. You don't have to pull a machete on somebody. So
Did she
it
just
gets
walk
better.
around with a machete? I didn't have any college professors that had a machete on them, but
Well, it was in her
maybe
house.
it's just-
It was in
Okay,
her house.
I see.
Maybe she's a machete collector. So just to let people listening on Spotify, the podcast, it's a car camera in a video, and it actually shows the gentleman from the Post walking back to the car, and the woman all of a sudden appears with a machete, and one of the reporters tries to take a photo of her, and I don't think she likes that, so then she starts chasing him around the car with a machete. I mean, at least she has the hood on or whatever. But then watch, they're running down the street, and there she is with a machete,
Yeah.
just chasing them with a machete. It's crazy, and that's when they decided to fire her, right? Not when she assaulted some other people, not when a professor. And again, this is one of the problems, and that's why I like this article, and we'll read a little bit more. Like, universities are places where kids should grow up to be adults, and part of that process is to be faced with things and be challenged with new ideas and be able to sit there and logically discuss things. And we've talked about this before, Jimmy, because I remember talking about how when I was a kid and we learned about the classics like Plato and Socrates. And for some reason, I love that idea of there was a time in our civilization, in our world, where people would sit and talk and try figuring out what life means and what things mean and what it means to be a human and how we get along and all those things. And I think what happened is we got to a point in society where we think we know everything. And because we know everything, if you have a different opinion or a different idea, then those other people are wrong, idiots, and don't deserve to live.
What's sad is seeing it evolve to the point where it has. I remember, you used to see this stuff where like a Ben Shapiro or something would speak at a university, and it still happens today. And you'd see the students like boycott who he was and like his speech at the university.
Yep.
And then like usually it was just these big name people that would come if it was like a Tucker Carlson type of personality or something like that. But as the years have gone by, you've seen it become more frequent at a lesser scale as well. Like these kids, again, I didn't see what they were handing out, but it seemed like it was just a pamphlet on pro-life or some facts on abortion or something like
Yep.
that. And it's gotten to the point where it's like, I mean, if this trend keeps continuing, you're not going to have any difference of thought or any different viewpoints that are going to be allowed in the school campus at all. So I mean, that's a place that I hope we don't get to as a country. I hope enough people wake up and realize that we're trending in the wrong direction, and
Yep.
we need more free speech, not less free speech.
So, I don't usually call for firing people, but at some point in time, if you're in a position that's supposed to do something, if you're like a college professor, in my mind, I mean, outside of some classes, because I do think there's some classes in colleges that are just set up just to talk a certain way or to talk about a subject a certain way, and we're not going to bring discussions into this, right? But on a whole, I have no problem if a professor gets up and says, I believe this and I believe that, and this is why. If he allows for a discussion, if he allows for a student to say, well, I disagree and I think this, because I think what happens is, again, you have that battlefield ideas, and maybe that kid doesn't know something, but far too often now it's people that know too much, they know everything, and if you say anything opposite, you're wrong. And again, it used to be just you're wrong, but what happened is, I always tell people my ideas I think are better, and it's not because I'm a better person. It's because I think about things. I think about the long-term implications of these policies. I think about the long-term implications of what people say. And I sit there, and maybe it's because the jobs we had in the past, but I sit there when someone says, oh, I believe this, and I'm like, well, that don't make sense because this, and this. I want you to explain how you came to your conclusion, because my conclusion's way different. And then when I start pointing out this is what I think's going to happen, and this is why, and this is why, and they understand, hey, listen, Justin's right, right? They used to be that, and now it's just like, well, I can't be wrong, and he's doing this because of these characteristics that he happened to be born with. So he's an evil person, and he doesn't deserve to live. It's just mind blowing. It needs to stop. So let me read a little bit more about this article, because there's even more instances of this is happening. And I'm going to be honest too. I'm sure this happens where there's conservative people that aren't allowing liberal people to have a say, because it's not exclusive. I think the exclusivity is the violence now being attached to one side. So the redefinition of opposing views as violence is a favorite excuse for violent groups like Antifa, which continue to physically assault speakers with pro-life and other disfavored views. as explained by Rutgers professor Mark Bray in his Antifa, the Anti-Fascist Handbook. The group believes that free speech, as such, is merely a bourgeoisie fantasy, unworthy of consideration. As one Antifa member explained, free speech is a non argument. You have the right to speak, but you also have the right to be shut up. But remember, Antifa is just an idea. There's a book you can buy about that idea. When people criticize Antifa for its violent philosophy, MSNBC Joy Reid responded to the critics, "You might be the fascist." Faculty members have filed this sense of license to silence other. Former City University of New York law dean Mary Lou Bilek even insisted disrupting a speech on free speech was free speech. Technically, right? Technically, the same week as Rodriguez' attack at the State University of New York at Albany, sociology professor, I don't know, this other professor shut down a pro-life display and then allegedly resisted arrest. And this week, a University of Michigan economics professor, Justin Wolfers, declared that some of those boycotting the store Target over its Pride Month clothing were engaging in literal terrorism. He insists that he was referring to those confronting Target employees. Now, here's the problem: the only thing I've heard about the Target in confronting employees wasn't from conservative sides. Conservatives that were boycotting were like, "I'm not going to the store." What I heard was happening is they were getting threats because Target was capitulating to conservatives. And those people were like, "We're going to blow your store up or we're going to do things." And you're like,
One's on the left.
yes. So there's one other thing I found in this article. There was a University of Rhode Island professor, Eric Loomis. He defended the murder of a conservative protester and said he saw nothing wrong with such acts of violence. He was later elevated to the position of director of graduate studies of history. So, so you legit. I got a picture up if people want to see him. And this article is really good. We're gonna post this article on our YouTube page because everything I talked about all these people and all these incidents, there's actually a hyperlink you can click and it'll take you to the news article. And right now, for the people listening, we have the picture up. And the guy says there's nothing wrong with the murder of a Trump supporter from a moral perspective. When you've gotten to that point, you've lost the plot.
I have a hot take with Trump and all of this too.
Oh,
People say that Trump has been like, one of the most polarizing figures, which I think is true to an extent, but I think in a way he's also been one of the most like, I don't know what the opposite of that is, but like the unpolarizing figures as well, because I met so many people that like Trump brought them to like, the absolute highest decibel level in terms of noise, and like their heads exploded, that now like the media has just like injected so much hysteria around Trump that like anyone other than Trump has just been like a whole nother level in terms of like they've already been brought up to the highest level. So now it's like there's no one that can feel as polarized as they felt during how the media made a lot of people feel around Trump. So like I've talked to so many people that have like, were just absolutely hysterical when Trump was in there. And now they're like, oh yeah, I understand it's good for people to have like different views and all this other stuff, that were just like completely the opposite end of the spectrum when Trump was in there. So I think in many ways he's been like, at the end of the day, he's also helped to solve the polarization problem as well, as kind of as kind of a different viewpoint as that may seem.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you say that, because sometimes I think on this show we talk a lot about a lot of deep issues, and I think a lot of people might feel like they don't have a say or the world's getting worse. But like you said, I've told people the last couple of years, I go, some of this bad stuff that's happened has actually been really good. And a lot of the good things is people are paying attention. Like you said, now we've been on this high of being against this person, that now we're starting to come down from it, realizing, hey, listen, we need to lower the temperature. As I said earlier, we need to lower the temperature, have these discussions. We're seeing these colleges go crazy. We're seeing kids destroying cities. We're seeing professors tear up and throw up, break displays of things they don't like to see. And people sitting there like, this isn't how it's supposed to be. Like I said, I think a lot of people like, well, this isn't good, and America isn't what we want it to be. And that's the positive thing. More and more people are saying this isn't the America we want it to be. This is not what it was, and it could be better, and it should be better, and it's incumbent upon us to make it better. And again, I think that's the reason why you and I do this. A lot of people who are trying to do things around the country, say they're doing it for their family and their kids. And I believe some of them are. I think other people use that as a way to get political power. But I'll tell you what, the reason I'm in this is I want to leave this country better for future generations. And if that means speaking the truth when it's inconvenient or considered violent, I will speak the truth. I think you'll do the same thing. And I think what's happening is you're finding more and more people that are willing to do that. And to me, that's a positive. To me, I tell people all the time, because I talk to a lot of people, and a lot of people feel really like they're losing, and not that they're losing per se, but the country's just on the wrong track. And I tell them, I go, well, I get to talk to hundreds, if not thousands of people. And there's so many good people out there, and the media wants to paint this picture, but there's so many good people, and there's so many good people doing things, and we're on the right track. And sometimes you have to hit a low before you can figure out what you need to change, and then you're changing. I think we're on the right track. I really do. Like a lot of these articles in these episodes and segments we've done the last couple of weeks are showing you people that have otherwise would have never paid attention to anything are becoming active, are saying things that normally they wouldn't say, and doing things they normally wouldn't do, because they understand we're on the wrong track, and that we're all going to have to come together, and we're all going to have to tell our political leaders enough. It's time to do what you were supposed to do. It was time to run this country how it was supposed to. You had a good run of doing what the hell you want. It's going to change.
So what's the over under on bills that get passed for the rest of the year in mass
Oh
legislature?
my
Do you think we're
gosh.
going to do more than 10 or less
out of,
than 10?
out of 6,000, listen, I would love for it to stop right now.
Agreed.
But I don't know, when we were looking at the thing, there was probably like another 30. So I bet you a couple hundred. And again, the ones where they're, this person needs more sick time, or they want to change the name of this police barracks or whatever. I don't care about those, right? But the ones that actually affect us in our pocketbook and actually take more rights away, they can pass another one the rest of my life for all I care. You know what I mean? They could just sit there and do nothing. But hey, Jim, thank you very much. Thank you for everyone for watching and listening. And like I said, don't be disheartened. I think if Jim and I were disheartened, we wouldn't do this. I don't want to speak for you, Jim. I'll let you say some words too. But I think, like I said, being in this arena has showed us that there's a lot of people fighting. There's a lot of people pushing back, and better days are ahead.
Yes, agreed.
All right. Well, take care. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it. See you next show.
Thank you.
Yep, bye.